Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement 2. Don't worry, this is not going to be another in-depth, long Apple II repair video. What we're going to be working on today is, let's just call it Apple II Archeology. This Apple II Plus, just as you see it here, was actually saved from a shed. So we'll kind of call it a shed-found Apple II Plus. And a little bit of backstory on the discovery of this machine was I got reached out to by a viewer who grew up here in Oregon, close by to Portland. And at some point in the very distant past, his father had stashed a whole bunch of computers, including this Apple II Plus, in a shed. And that shed has, let's just say, seen better days. The roof had leaked something like 30 years ago, and the family pretty much just considered that everything in the shed was probably a write-off. So never really went in there. There was a bunch of other stuff stored in there, and I have some video footage, which hopefully you'll be seeing right now, where I went in and kind of looked at what's there. So there's a bunch of Commodore pets and all sorts of other stuff. So with the help of a couple of the people in our retro community here in Portland, we're going to be going and gathering up all of those computers and then distributing them to the various members of our local community. We can be pretty sure that the stuff that's in there, of course, is going to be in relatively rough shape because the roof has been leaking for a long time. There was definitely like rodent activity in there. And this Apple II was just sitting kind of underneath some stuff tucked away in the corner, along with a bunch of Commodore pets. And I grabbed it because I thought it'd be kind of fun to take a look inside of this. I think there's a bunch of expansion cards in here, and mainly that's what I want to take a look at with this computer. I want to see how, well, I guess we'll turn this on and see if it does work in this video, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to work. But at least I want to just sort of look through the cards that are in this. The Apple II, to me, what's cool about it is because it has expansion card capabilities, it's always really fun to see a machine like this that was, obviously used by someone and then is stashed away. What kind of cards do they have in here? What type of expansion was going on? And the Apple II Plus was a machine that definitely needed expansion because without it, well, at the minimum, you're going to need a disk controller card for the floppy drives, which are attached to the computer. But then the machine like this doesn't even have support for 80 columns without a card and stuff like that. So we're just going to be taking a look inside this computer. So it's a casual video, just kind of exploring what this computer is all about. And yeah, we're going to kind of go from there. All right, so let's start taking a look at this computer. So I'm wearing gloves because, like I said, there was rodent activity in the shed, and I haven't cleaned this thing off at all. The floppy drives, they do have the Drive 1, Drive 2 stickers on them, so it's kind of cool. I'm noticing that this lever is broken, so that's something that's there. It's fixable, but that's pretty common. There are no floppy disks in either of these drives. As for the computer itself, it's actually, it looks like it's in relatively good condition. The plastic on these Apple II Pluses and the Apple IIs is painted, so it doesn't have or suffer from any yellowing issues, although you can get scratches on it. I don't know, for instance, like if that's a scratch, there's like a spot there, and you can see some schmutz over here on the side. On the keyboard, the power light, it's a little cover there that's kind of worn off, and the keys themselves actually do have some shiny spots on them, and I can tell just by looking at these, this is not the better keyboard, the Alps keyboard. The key feel isn't too bad considering where this was stored in the shed. Did not clean this off at all, so I think just kind of where it was situated in the corner probably means, I guess we'll find out, but I have a feeling maybe water wasn't dumping into this thing all the time. I think the shed was leaking somewhere else. But yeah, as for the feel, I don't remember the names of all the different keyboards. I have a feeling this is probably a later Apple II Plus, so it's not the one-piece keyboard design that the original Apple II has and the early II Pluses. This is going to be a two-piece, meaning there's a keyboard with a PCB and traces and whatnot, and a separate encoder board. And then from that, which has like a 40-pin dip, from that, a ribbon cable goes down to the motherboard, and then that sends the key presses down to the motherboard as ASCII. The Alps keyboard is the best Apple II Plus keyboard in my opinion. It uses SKCC switches. You can kind of tell it's an Alps keyboard when you just type on it. The unfortunate truth, as far as I'm aware of what this one is, and we'll see when we open this thing up, is that it's very difficult to service these keyboards, and pretty much, I'm sure a bunch of keys aren't going to work if this computer even works. So one thing that's interesting is you can always tell when you look at these disk drives that this is a later set of Apple II disk drives, because the earliest versions had rainbow cables. And if you look at the back side, it's sort of a smooth texture as opposed to the top side where you can see the actual wires that are in the ribbon cable. And this is because this has additional shielding inside the cable. And if you take a look here where it goes into the computer, see this little nub right here? This is that shielding that I think if you're using this on a later Apple IIe, then this sort of clips inside the case and joins the shielding of the disk drive to the case itself. But I don't think the 2 Plus necessarily has any kind of shielding inside unless this is the later RFI version. And in that case, inside of this case has sort of a metallic paint that I think is conductive and becomes part of that shielding. Now, right off the bat, we can see that this thing does have accessories in here. So there's a phone jack for a modem, and it says Hayes, so it's an official Hayes modem. If we look here, there's a Videx kind of module in here. This would be an 80 columns card. Videx was a company out of Corvallis, Oregon that made 80 column cards, and this was the little, I guess, official module. It sort of slides into the opening. There's 3 of these openings. Like you see this cable sticking through one opening. There's one behind the modem jack, one behind this, and then there are these little plastic rivets, I think, that kind of clamp this in place. Most likely what's going on here is you're supposed to take the video output from the Apple II right there and run it into this, and then out comes an 80 column display output that can switch between 40 and 80 columns. Now there's a toggle switch here, which is not frozen, so that's kind of nice. As far as I'm aware, there's an auto switch module you can get for these Videx cards, which when you engage 80 columner will automatically switch from the 40 column internal video to the 80 columns on the Videx card. Next to the top jack, it's going to be hard to see on camera, it says M, and next to this one on the left side it says A. So main, aux, maybe? Not sure. Also what I'm seeing on the outside is we have asset tags. There's one on this floppy drive and one on the computer. Let's take a closer look at that in a second. Everything else looks pretty standard, just a standard Aztec switching power supply. I'm not really seeing anything too different or too out of the ordinary. Bottom of the floppy drive is all pretty standard stuff. On the bottom of this drive, same thing, although the stickers aren't falling apart nearly as much. All right, now looking at the asset tag, might be a little hard to see. It actually says the Oregon Bank. And what's interesting is to think that a bank was using an Apple II. The date says February 1982, and it says disk or 2 disk drives with controller and I guess some asset tag information. And the other asset tag that's on the computer, same date, and it reads Apple II and accessories. So pretty curious. Now, when it comes to the procurement of all the hardware and stuff that was in the shed, I don't know a whole lot about it. I don't know if anyone from the family ever worked for the Oregon Bank or how something that was an asset of the Oregon Bank ever ended up in the possession of this family. But I did see some of the Commodore pets that were in there had Portland School District engraved into them, and those Commodore pets with Portland School District ended up all over the place here in the Pacific Northwest, including, I think, 2 of the pets that I have are engraved with that same Portland Public School District stuff. And I think the school district must have had a big auction, and a lot of stuff got distributed to the community, to people at the time who really liked this stuff, and a lot of it just got stashed away, and it's back in the hands of people who like using these old computers now, like me. Let's see on the bottom of this computer if there is anything special. Nope. It's all just normal Apple II stickers, and it says A2S, I think it's 1048. That means this is a 48K machine, or it was sold as a 48K machine. The screws on the bottom of the case are actually all okay, except this one here is actually corroded. So one corroded screw out of all of them. There's one at the front that's also corroded by the keyboard, but all the rest of them are still black plastics. So even though this machine was obviously exposed to pretty rough conditions, overall, I gotta say the condition of this is quite good, and I think it would clean up quite well, except for this keyboard, as I still stand that thing is never gonna work properly. So let's just pop the cover on this thing and see what we see in here. All right. So right off the bat, we have a nice assortment of cards in here. So we have definitely what is a language card. I'm going to say this is a Microsoft one. We'll take a closer look at this stuff in a second. This is the one that has the cable that sticks out the back. It's a 25 pin in slot 1. So this is going to be, I think, a printer card, parallel printer. And then we have something in slot 2, which I'm going to wager, because it's not connected to any kind of cables, it's probably CPM. Then we have slot 3, which is going to be our Videx card, and it has a header that goes to that thing on the back, which almost certainly is a manual switcher for 80 columns and 40 columns. Then we have what is our Hayes modem here. This is going to be in slot 4, and our disk 2 card. And luckily, just kind of taking a quick glance, I see a tiny bit of evidence of rodent droppings in here, but I don't think the rodents were inside the machine. I think it might have dropped through the vents, or these slots that are the vents. And it is a 2-piece keyboard, so it's that later keyboard, as I suspected. All right, let me reposition the cameras so we can take a closer look at all these cards and then also test this thing out. For testing, I'm going to be using this power supply because I've already gone through this, like changed out the refuzz and made sure that that power supply works, because this one here, who knows, 1331483 1389716. So later power supply, although I don't know if this power supply came from a 2E or 2 Plus, it does have a 1983 42nd week date code, and it's Dynacomp, while the one that's in this machine is an Aztec power supply. All right, first off, let's take out the disk controller, and then I will reposition this. We can tell this is the last revision of the Apple II Plus motherboard because it has a split in the ground plane right here. This tells us this is an RFI revision of the board. And incidentally, I think that these boards have the worst image quality with the most jail bars due to this particular fix. Apple tried to kind of isolate the video output section from the rest of the ground plane on the motherboard. And I've had to do things in the past where I've had to connect these two ground planes to eliminate a lot of the jail bars that are happening on these types of machines. Now, rotating this around, let's just go through these cards real quick. So this is that Hayes modem. So we can see, well, this is a Hayes Micromodem 2E from 1986. 1984 revision on the PCB. So yeah, it's probably 1200 bits per second or maybe even 300. Now, as for the little thing on the back for the phone jack here, you just have to loosen the two screws on the back and then that should slide out. And I might as well get a screwdriver and do that because I would like to test this machine. It does need a good clean and really just need to kind of take everything out. That slides out. There it is. There's our little Hayes modem jack. You can see how that kind of works. All right, let's take out this card here in slot 1, which I think is going to be parallel printer card. Asynchronous serial interface. Okay, not a printer card. So they were using this with serial printer or maybe some other device that required serial. Maybe they were interfacing it to something like a mainframe or a mini computer, and therefore you would just run some software on your Apple II Plus that would then connect, using a terminal connection, or it act as a terminal emulator to that other system. You can see some of the gunk that's sort of built up on this thing, but I think it's nothing that couldn't wash off. It says copyright 1979 CCS on here. That must be the logo there, CCS. This chip right here is probably the serial UART. You might think it's a ROM chip, but I think that's going to be a UART. It says 6850. So yeah, that's a Motorola part, and I guess this is a clone, AMI, second source. This is the PROM. So it says program ROM with these two small chips here. I like how it's labeled very clearly. It says U5, U6, high byte, low byte. Now they're calling it high and low byte, but I would have to look up the exact part number of these two chips, but I wonder if these are 4 bits wide. So you combine these together for, the 8-bit program ROM. So you typed PR number, what is this? It was in slot 1, PR number 1, and that would run a little bit of code on here that would allow you to utilize this card. This is unlike the Super Serial card that Apple made. They had like software controlled settings and stuff. This will all be via this baud rate setting here. So switch 3 is on, 1, 2, 4 are off. So bit 2 is turned on, and depending on how that decodes in conjunction with this crystal, which looks like, I think it's 2.1576 megahertz, that would generate the right baud rate. And most likely cards like this only supported like 110, 300, 1200, maybe 2400 bits per second. It's possible this does 9600, but I wouldn't know for sure without having to look that up a little further. So in this slot, which is slot 2, this is definitely the Microsoft soft card. So a Z80 card. Very awesome. It's in good shape. I don't see any issues with corrosion on the edge connector. It's a little tarnished actually. I don't think that would stop this thing from working. So this is a Z80, and this allows the Apple II to run CP/M. Now this card, which is one of the earlier versions of this card, I don't know if Microsoft was the one that actually designed this or they copied this from someone else. And this card, what it does not have is any main memory on board. So a Z80, of course, 8-bit processor, supports 64K of RAM. And with this card, it needs to use the main system memory for CP/M. Now, of course, the Apple II, this has 48K of RAM on the motherboard. And part of that memory on the motherboard, just notice this barcode sticker that's sitting right here. The Apple II uses its main memory for both graphics and text mode. Therefore, generally, you can't use that for program RAM. So if you're going to be writing or running an OS like CP/M for this card, you wouldn't necessarily want to use it. But if you have an 80 column card, which is what this is, then that memory can be used because you're not using the 40 column output. And if you just use the display memory, what we normally showing like the character display for program RAM, you just see garbage if you looked at the 40 column display, but that wouldn't matter because you're using this card, which does have its own RAM on it as your output. And generally, as far as I'm aware, the CPM for the Apple II always really required an 80 column card, like a Videx compatible type card. But it is kind of nice to have one of these official Microsoft cards. And yes, Microsoft did make consumer products for the Apple II, just like this. 1980 is the date code that's on there. And 81, okay, so these are all socketed chips, but we could say that this card's probably from 1981. Also a little bit earlier than those asset tags, which is kind of interesting, but also lines up with what we have going on with the serial card. So I'm wondering now if they were booting into CPM and using this serial card and maybe the modem later to dial in or connect to some type of a system. Hard to say, hard to know, because we don't have any documentation and I don't have any discs or anything that came with this thing. Now the next card, of course, is that 80 column card from Videx, and there are some stickers down here that have fallen off. All right, so when you take a look at this 80 column card, there are positions for 3 EEPROMs. This one down here is going to be the firmware itself, so version 2.1 from 1981, and then these two are the character generators. And this sticker would have been right there. So standard character generator 7x9 font, and then this socket is for an extra EEPROM that could have either an inverted copy of this character set, so just the standard 7x9 inverted, or it could have special characters like line characters, so for doing graphing and stuff like that. And it's nice to see this is a real original Videx card, 1980, made in Corvallis, Oregon, like as I said. It does have a regular CRTC, so a CRT controller chip, same one that's used on, say, IBM MDA and CGA card. There is dedicated VRAM on here, so the text buffer and everything is contained entirely within this card. It does allow you to use all of the 48K and actually 64, because this thing has some additional RAM on this card, for the OS. And then the video buffer is completely separate, and you have to access it, through the routines that allow it to go through the slot. Now, one of the things about this card, which is an improvement over the character generator that's on the Apple II Plus and the Apple II, is this does support lowercase, and you see the font size is 7x9, so it actually has more scan lines. Therefore, you can have descender, so lowercase g or j or whatnot. And the font that's on the Apple II is, from my recollection, 5x7. So theoretically, the characters that this generates, even though it's just composite video, can be a little bit higher quality. Now, as for this little switch module, it is exactly what I had suspected. If we loosen these fasteners, I think this should slide out just like the modem one did. And we can see by just looking at this that the video input comes in over these wires, goes to the switch, and the switch in one position just passes one connector through to the other one, or otherwise it actually connects your monitor output. So actually M would stand for monitor, A for Apple. So this is what plugs into the 40 column motherboard connector, and this goes to your monitor. And yeah, it allows you to manually switch back and forth. Now, Videx did later come up with the auto switcher, which has been recreated, and there's a little board that goes inside the computer. And there's actually a header right there that it connects to, the little board. I think it plugs into maybe these chips, and it will detect if you go to graphics mode, it'll switch back to 40 column, and then a signal that comes from the card, which with the appropriate firmware also tells the switcher, well, basically it connects to this header, but there's some additional wires to see that aren't connected to anything, because notice it's only on 2 there. So additional signal comes from there, generated by the CRTC that switches this little switcher board into 80 column mode and back and forth. But this was the manual way of doing it. And I have to say, I have an actual Videx card, but I do not have one of these. And my assumption is, if we take a look at the date codes that are on these ICs, 81, this is all 81 stuff again. So I think the early Videx cards had this, and it was later that the firmware got updated and the auto switcher card was introduced. Now, some 80 column cards, like the ones that were in the Franklin Ace, replicated, or they were Videx compatible, but it also included the auto switching stuff directly on the card itself. You didn't even need to connect it to the motherboard. Well, you did. There was a wire that went to that little header, and it would work in a regular Apple II Plus just like this. With that header, it would pick up the 40 column video signal without having to have an external connection to the output jack on here, and it would also do the auto switching. So they introduced it there, or they added it right onto the card. And this card, which I don't know what it's actually called, it just says Videx on here. I don't know if it was called like the 80 column card or something, but I don't know if they had a later version that had the auto switching built into the card or not, but I've certainly never seen one. Loads and loads of clones Videx cards exist. I have a few of them. They just are carbon copies of the Videx card, and I think the firmware pretty much is just a carbon copy as well. And even Apple II, when it comes to the Apple IIe, and people might have to correct me in the comment section, but I'm pretty sure that the Apple IIe's 80-column graphics that are built in, along with the 2C and the 2GS, pretty much replicates all the functionality of the Videx card. So if you're running software that's designed for the Videx card, it will work on the IIe. So like the CPM software that expects the Videx card when it launches CPM will work fine on the Apple II, because all of those like control codes and stuff are pretty much the same. What's not the same, of course, is the Apple IIe does not have a CRTC on it. So if you're going to reprogram the CRTC to create like custom video modes and stuff like that, that obviously will not work. But if all you're doing is just displaying text on screen, then that should work fine on the Apple IIe if it originally was designed for the Videx. Also, of course, you can't use the Videx extra characters if you had the extra ROM on there with like the graphical characters. Like I think there was a scientific ROM you could have with like symbols and stuff like that. There were a few options that you could get for this thing. Luckily, the Videx card's very well documented, and everything's pretty much been archived, like all the demo software and the manuals and stuff like that. So going back to the computer, let's just move the 80-column card out of the way, and I dropped, of course, the stickers that were in there, but I'll get those out in a second. The last card that's in here is the Microsoft language card. I'm pretty sure this was a clone of Apple's card, I think. I don't remember, to be honest. I'm not 100% sure, actually, of like the history of this, like who came up with the language card first. The reason why, well, I think Apple's original card, called the language card, was simply ROM chips plugged into slot 0, and that allowed you to replace the motherboard ROMs with different ROMs that were on the ROM card. Specifically, you could switch between AppleSoft Basic, which is what's on that 2 Plus, and Integer Basic, which is on the earlier 2 Pluses. And you could even put like the original Apple II ROMs that had integer basic and didn't have auto start, so when you turned it on, it was just going to give you garbage and drop you machine language monitor. You could put those on the language card that stuck into slot 0, and you put it here. There was a switch that actually stuck through the back of the case right here, and you could externally toggle between those different modes. But with the language cards too, and they all work pretty much the same way, is instead of having ROMs that are fixed in that upper memory location that replaces this allows you to replace the ROMs with the RAM. So this has an additional 16K of RAM, and it replaces 12K of ROM space with RAM. And the reason why this ribbon cable is plugged into the motherboard is it actually is taking the DRAM refreshing stuff that's happening for this top bank and is using it to refresh this memory as well. And you remove the chip that's on the motherboard and you replace one of the chips that's on here. These are all TI chips. So are these. Okay, so I can't really tell which is the original one, but it's probably this one that was on the motherboard. So when you get the card, that socket's empty. You take that chip out of the motherboard, plug this ribbon cable in, and then move the chip there. And then that allows it to continue to work. That chip is part of this bank of memory, and then this bank of memory is the additional 64K. So 12K of the ROM space is replaced with RAM, and these LEDs just show the different state, because you can kind of make it read-only RAM, write protect the RAM, you could do stuff like that. And now there's a few different modes this card can run in. But 12K plus 48K, that's not 64K total. Well, that's because part of the memory map on the Apple II is I/O space. So it's for controlling the enunciators, joystick ports, keyboard, all the functions that the Apple II needs. So the additional little bit of RAM that's not mapped is actually bank switched in with a little chunk of 2 or 4 kilobytes or something like that. I can't remember the exact memory map without looking it up. This is all just off the top of my head. But it allows you to bank switch in that little extra piece of memory so you can get a full 64K of RAM on the Apple II, but it is not contiguous. It's never contiguous. It's always 48K contiguous from 0 to 48K. That's what's on the motherboard already. And then you have what is the ROM space on the Apple II. That's the next contiguous block. That's the 12K. That's from D000 to FFFF, and that's the RAM on the card. And then, like I said, a big little chunk of that is bank switched out to give you that extra amount of memory to bring it up to 64 kilobytes. So ultimately, for testing this thing out, I do not need to have the language card in. In fact, I'm going to pop it out, because ultimately, if you're going to be diagnosing a machine like this, I really do recommend that you take out all the peripherals and just try to run it in the base, or the most base configuration possible. Although you will want to remove the RAM chip that is on this card and put it back into that socket, just so you have 48K on the motherboard. So let's just do that. We'll seal that chip right there. Make sure I have this in the correct way. Okay, and there we have it. That's our additional chip. So these TI chips all have 1981 date codes on them, 81, and these have Apple logos on them. So do these. Oh, I just realized that's how you can tell which is the original chip. It should have an Apple logo on it. And you know what? I don't see an Apple logo on any of these chips. But you see the little Apple logo? It's on these chips. Same on these and these. But that chip doesn't have an Apple logo, and nor does any of these. So I have to assume that whoever did this upgrade, maybe this was like in a, I don't know, IT lab. They just had a bunch of extra RAM chips. They just popped the extra one out, put the card in, and it was already populated with that. And that extra Apple chip just kind of went into a pile of stock chips. So yeah, RFI motherboard, 1979 is the date code that's on there. I think at the factory, they wrote the year and the week that this motherboard or this computer was put together. 81 34th week. That's the number that's there on this little pad. Now, taking a look at the keyboard, confirms without any shadow of a doubt that this thing has the two-piece design. So yeah, this is the really horrible keyboard. It has like this foil on it, and I could just see some of the foil there. I definitely see some corrosion in there as well. Like there's a metal bar down there. You won't really be able to see it very easily, but yeah, that's the keyboard. The encoder is transportable between different keyboard types for the 2 Plus, and maybe the very last of the Apple IIs as well. I don't know if any of those use a two-piece design. The earliest keyboards on the Apple II have a single-piece design where the encoder chip is actually built right into the PCB of the motherboard. Those are the diagnostics keyboards. Very difficult to work on those as well. The power supply, these are very reliable, but they do have refas in them sometimes, so we're not even gonna bother to turn that on. We're just gonna go directly to this one over here, which I know works. All right, so power is connected up to the power supply, which is connected to the motherboard. I'm gonna apply power, and let's see what this thing does. Do we get a beep out of it or not? I don't have any video hooked up, but the beep is a good sign that this has some sign of life. Here we go, 3, 2, 1. Yes, more reliable sockets than on the Milmar Brazilian clone, that is for sure. I haven't touched anything on here. It just sort of came to life. Let's plug something into this thing. Okay, I hooked up the video cable. Let's see what happens when we turn this on. Do we get a normal video signal? We can still have a beep. Oh, bad memory. That's what that's all about. How is this keyboard working? Well, keys are working. Not very well. Like that's R, not working at all. This is completely expected. Also the power light, that doesn't work at all. I mean, we have some signs of life on this keyboard, so that's certainly better than we've had with other recent machines. Well, maybe what we should do is we should just go directly to the Apple II dead test ROM. It's not gonna be a repair video, but I just wanna show that using the dead test ROM in these is quite useful because it can tell you a lot about what's wrong. One thing I can tell is the 0 page and the stack portion of the RAM, which is the first bank down here by the keyboard, is working because you wouldn't have a normal Apple II screen like we're getting here. We'll turn it off and on. Yeah, we wouldn't have the normal Apple II if there were issues with the RAM. Although when we turn this on, let me just do it again. You can see that like that question mark and @ symbol pattern is exactly the same across the entire screen. And then the system ROM tries to clear the memory, you know, with a blank screen and then write the Apple II banner at the top. Well, it's only able to clear some of the memory. So it almost feels like maybe we have an addressing issue or something. Let me grab a language card that has the ROM, the replacement ROM on here, and we'll pop that in. All right, so this is Bradley Bell's replacement language card. This is an open source design available on GitHub. I'll put a link in the description to it. The thing I like about this card is obviously you don't need a little ribbon cable that goes to the motherboard because it's using static RAM, just the standard like cache memory that you can find very easily. But the other thing about it is that it uses a normal ROM, so you can enable and disable the ROM. So in the boot up configuration of the machine, when you just plug this in, before the language card's even initialized, it will just replace the system ROMs with whatever is on this ROM. So you can put the dead test on there and put it in slot 0, and then the dead test will run. You don't even have to have those chips installed at all for this thing to work. But then the status LEDs that are up at the top here work exactly like the ones on the Microsoft card here, which allows you to do RAM read enable, RAM write enabled, and then the bank 1, which is like 0 or 1, that turns off and on depending on how the card is configured. So this really does work exactly like the Microsoft card, but then it also, well, gives you that ROM replacement. There's a bit of something in there. Let's just see if I can clean that out. There's a lot of dust in this machine. I really need to take it outside and give it a good blowout. So now when we turn this on, the dead test ROM that's on here, it should take effect. And here we go, 3, 2, 1. Oh, it did not work. Let me double check to make sure that that ROM is enabled. It is disabled, so I gotta switch the jumper over to the enabled position. Okay, there we go. Obviously, I'm going to use that card, and I don't want the dead test ROM to run. I just want to use it as normal Apple II language card. I got to switch the ROM to disabled. Okay. Let's see if we can fix this video issue. All right, I don't know what was going on with this device, so I switched it to there. Okay, well, right off the bat, something's wrong. It's testing the 0 page. It says 0 stack page okay, but it never actually tests the rest of the RAM. It is like continually looping. Let me just kind of jiggle this around in here. Try again. Same thing. It should go from this screen, which isn't looking correct because, you know, like we have part of the RAM that's not writable. It should continue running. So this is actually good because maybe I'm going to work with David Giller, who is the one who wrote this ROM originally, and we can try to figure out what's wrong here and why this is not able to actually run its diagnostic. It's crashing constantly. You know, the one thing about the Apple II is while it's very nice that every chip is in a socket, and that's pretty much universal. I've never seen an Apple II that wasn't like that. The issue is just like that Brazilian clone I worked on recently, is you're going to have sockets issues. And especially when the machine is not stored well, like this machine clearly wasn't, in a shed for 30 years, leaking, hot, cold, you know, all the usual, you're going to potentially have issues. If you're looking at this startup screen and you have ideas about what specifically is wrong, I'd love to hear about it in the comment section. A couple things I'm going to point out here is that the square bracket flashing cursor should not be on the top line. I'm quite positive it should be on the line one down from where it is right now. It is on the same line as the Apple II text, which I'm quite positive is not correct. So that, and the fact that, let's try if I can move down. Okay, so I can move down. So I hit escape and I move down to the next line down. If I hit one more down arrow with the M key, it skipped over those two lines. That's a clue as to what's wrong. So yeah, please put your comments in the comment section as to what you think is going on with this Apple II just by looking at these particular symptoms of what we see on screen here. I think people are pretty burned out on Apple II repairs right now, but I need to just take some notes on this machine and kind of put it aside. This will obviously be a future repair sometimes down the road, but it'd be kind of cool if we get people's ideas and we kind of crowdsource what people think is going wrong with this. I have ideas in my head right now already as to what's going on. I kind of set it up a little earlier, but I won't talk too much about it. But yeah, there's some really good hints here as to what we see on screen, as to what is actually wrong with this machine. So there we have it. That's my testing of this shed found Apple II Plus, left for dead, and seems to be in pretty good shape. Floppy drives I didn't test. Keyboard obviously has issues. Computer isn't working. We just saw that, and I haven't tested any of these cards. I will test these cards off camera, but most likely all of these cards probably work fine. Or looking at them, most of them have sockets, except for the Hayes modem. Everything else has every chip socketed, so that could be issues. But nothing was super interesting inside here, but I do love to open up Apple IIs because you really never know what you're going to find. And there were some rare Apple II cards, none of which this thing had inside of it. But sometimes you never know. You're going to find a shed or barn found Apple II Plus and then find a really cool rare card in it. And I do have several of those cards from other old machines that I found that I've taken out, and those are for future videos to kind of show off and talk about. But all the stuff that's in here is all pretty run-of-the-mill. I don't think I'll need to make another follow-up video on any of this. Unless anyone watching wants me to do that, please comment down below. And I guess for now, that is going to be that. So thank you all of my supporters. Thanks to my subscribers, comments, you know, all the usual YouTube junk. And that's it. So stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.